Hey guys, Jay from Java Group, business consultancy here again. How are you all going? Yet another video to try and help out around software development and how it all works. This one's focusing on Agile, Waterfall, and my favorite, Wagile. What methodologies are right for you? Again, this series is really just focusing around all of these different terminologies in project management or around the software project management life system, ecosystem, and just trying to help out non-tech people understand exactly what they are and why they work, why they need them, what they're for. So key takeaways in this one is what is a methodology? What is the difference between all of them? How do you pick the right one? How can they work for us and who needs to comply? So what is a methodology? So they're basically a approach for a project. And within software development, we talk about Waterfall and we talk about Agile predominantly. There are lots of others, but the two big ones are Waterfall and Agile that I hear commented and mentioned on all the time. Agile is always referred to as the latest, the greatest, the newest, the coolest, the way to stop the problems, to change people's perceptions, and all of these sorts of things. I've equally heard, because Agile isn't the newest and isn't the latest, it's been around for a while, and there's a lot of people out there that I've spoken to, that I've dealt with, that I've had to interact with, a lot of projects that I've had to salvage and save that have been Agile projects, and people have got a really negative viewpoint of it. So how did they come about? Just very quickly. Waterfall was the way that traditionally projects were done. Most projects historically, if we look back over the last 150, 200 years, were a construction-based type project. So what a waterfall project means is that you go to somebody with a concept or an idea, and you say to them, I want you to build a house, I want you to build a car, I want you to build a factory, whatever that situation was, I want you to build a light bulb. And then that business will say, okay, no problems at all. And they'll take down all of the requirements, which would mean stacks and stacks of documentation, piles and piles of paperwork, and months of meetings and discussions. And then they would go away and they'd make you your light bulb. And it'd be exactly to the massive manual that they'd put together right at the start. And they'd hand it back to you and they'd say, here's your light bulb. And let's say that process took 12, 18, 24 months. By the time they hand you the light bulb you may have asked for may have been a big incandescent bulb which had a screw type fitting. But the industry has evolved and changed, and new technologies have come onto the market. So by the time the team come back to you and say, here's your big screw incandescent light bulb, that's what you asked for. It's per the spec. We've got it all here written down. What would often happen, especially as things started to get faster and faster in terms of technology and adoption, was handing you back that light bulb. You're like, oh, well, this would have been good 18 months ago, but LED is now the way that we want all our light bulbs to be done. So we've committed all of this money and we've committed all of this time, and we've got something that's not really of any great value. And that's what a lot of people were finding within the software world, was that things were happening so fast, or industries were changing so quickly, people's perceptions were changing, people's demands were changing, sales targets were changing, all those sorts of things. Was by the time you'd come and you'd asked for this big system, and we'd defined exactly what the big system was, and then we had provided it to you, it was no longer relevant, or big chunks of it had to be rewritten, changed, or anything like that. Also within a waterfall project, because you define everything up front and you make sure that everything is exactly to the letter and clearly articulated and clarified, you couldn't make changes, or if you could, they were often costly and really difficult to do through really formal and mandated change request processes, and usually change management boards and all sorts of things. You didn't have an ability to be able to, as the industry likes to say, pivot and choose a new direction or take shape. So with that light bulb situation, if you'd realized that maybe 6 months in, bayonet fittings were better than a screw type fitting, you could go to the team and say, okay, we need to change that fitting on the end of it. In a waterfall project, it would be quite a cumbersome process to get it changed over to that bayonet one, if it could be done at all. and then that would go back into the works, and it often was very costly and very time consuming. Agile was birthed. There's an Agile manifesto. There's a lot of stuff you can Google and look up around how Agile came to be. But effectively, it was a bunch of engineers in the software industry getting together and saying, we need a better way of working. We need a way of being able to change gears, be able to pivot, be able to move with the times, and be able to adopt and adjust really easily and quickly without these costly and cumbersome timeframes. Now, what a lot of people get confused is that Agile doesn't mean no documentation. Agile doesn't mean no process, no structure. It doesn't mean sloppy work. It's often delivered that way and portrayed that way to customers, and that's where a lot of the negative experience seems to come from. But it is not at all that way. It's effectively just looking at the work and then breaking it down into smaller iterative chunks and being able to deliver small bits of value more regularly. So when looking at things that you could do around Agile and software, for example, is if you're going to be upgrading your entire system, let's say you're going to be upgrading entirely, the way you could approach it in a waterfall approach would be you would define all of the upgrades and everything that had to be done at the start of the project. The team would go away and build the entire upgraded system, and then at the end there would be a massive deployment where they push this huge system out and everything had changed, bang, in the one moment. Agile Project, you could approach it so that the first period you look at just the login page and you redesign the new login page. So you define exactly what it is, you document what it is, you plan to and estimate, you execute, you test it, and once everybody's happy and it's all approved, you allow that login page to go out. So now your login page is new, but the rest of the system hasn't been upgraded. And you can grab more and more chunks of that system and look to deploy them along there. And that way, if there is a change, so for example, a new product comes to market or you need to cancel a product out of it, you can easily and deftly move around that, plan for it, re-execute and adjust your plan as you're going. There's a third one down the bottom, Wagile. Wagile for me is the combination of Waterfall and Agile. It's traditionally what I see a lot of businesses doing. It's what I see a lot of development companies doing when they're promising that they're agile. We're an agile business. We follow the agile methodology. We use all of these fancy terms that relate to agile or parts thereof agile. But often the projects are delivered Wagile. So while the team might be working in smaller components, smaller chunks, and defining things out, often there are a lot of waterfall elements in there. So traditionally, you'll see things like one major go live at the end. What you might see is everything being defined and all the requirements and everything like that being drafted up together so that they can pull together an agreement and a scope of works and everything like that. You're not seeing the true sense of agile in there, or it's just a waterfall project which they're poorly documenting and they're calling themselves agile in terms of doing it. So there is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of issues around this, but effectively that's the two differences. A waterfall project is everything's defined at the front, big piece of work, one solid delivery, whereas an agile project is supposed to be continuous pieces of working occurring over the entire project, bits and pieces, drops of value happening all the way through, and then at the end you've got one final drop of value which should be about the size of every other one, and that's it, the project's done. One's got really fixed views in terms of what can and cannot be changed, what can and cannot be allowed for, and how deviation can occur from the original idea, where the other one's fairly fluid in terms of as long as everybody's in agreement and that it can be done, then being able to move and adjust to that. So we've gone through this slide largely already, but it's just a quick visual representation. So January is the planning, March is where the requirements, design, and technical approach are approved, and this is joining into the software development lifecycle SDLC video that I've also recorded on my channel. So you can see there, plan, requirements and designs, development starts, development is complete, there's a big phase, and then there's one big drop at the end. where it's the first time that your customers and external parties get to see any of the value and success. So in this project, January is when the idea has gained approval to proceed. So it's obviously been an idea they've had the year before. They've been discussing it and sort of defining what it looks like, and then in January they finally got the green light. The customers are only getting to interact with it in December. So there's no feedback external to the team in that period. And I've also seen that there's often within waterfall projects, there's a legacy of no one outside of the team even knows what's happening with the project. No one has any oversight or any understanding, and everyone's kept in the dark until that October to December window. A very traditional way of doing it. It's not a bad way. A lot of people will say it is a bad way, it's an old way, it's awful. It's still very valid today. And that's one thing that I will state here is that just because your company for a specific project chooses a methodology doesn't mean that every project you do from there on out must follow the same way. So if you have someone come in, a consultant come in, or someone come in and go, oh, we're going Agile now, and that's all we're ever going to do, that's not the truth. Every project should be assessed on its own merits and its own base to determine what is the best methodology to apply to this specific project and to the team that's going to be interacting within that project. What's the best strategic reasons for us as a business that we may want to use a certain methodology? Agile might be the right one. Waterfall also might be the right one. So keep that in mind, that while you might have done an Agile project in the past, it doesn't lock you into always having to do them. You might have another project that Waterfall suits it a lot better, or suits the team that are going to be doing it, or suits the strategic business direction or the roadmap that you've put together. And so that is perfectly fine to be able to chop and change and have a mixture of them both. Agile, so January, the plan gets approved. March, work commences. Designs, technical approach, development, testing, and everything commence. So if you're working in true Agile, you need to think of it as there is a sort of a plan, approved plan, a scope of work that's all broken down into little chunks, and the team are coming in and grabbing those chunks. They're working out, what is this chunk? How does it all interrelate together? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How are we going to solve the problem? How are we going to deliver the value and the outcome? How are we going to ensure and confirm that it's done and we've delivered those values and those outcomes, and then being able to do those chunks. And then in December, it says there that so deployments commence from March, and then December, your last deployment there. So if you have a look at the graph on the right, let's say we've got 100% of the work to do in time box 1 or iteration 1 or sprint 1, or period 1, month 1, whatever the case is. And then you can see there'd be a deployment at the end of 1, and we go into 2, and now we've only got, what is that, about 90% of the work done, and so on and so forth. So you can see that there's those continual dropping of the work. So where I used that example before of the system upgrade, maybe it's a full system upgrade that has to happen to your banking system, let's say. So your bank decides to do a project where they're going to upgrade everything. So they list out, we need to upgrade everything, and we need to do that. And the team, the designers and the business analysts and the, depending on how you're running, product owner or project manager, scrum master, those sorts of people are getting in there, and they're starting to form that work together, and they're starting to build out what it needs to look like, how it needs to be tested, how it needs to be done, how it needs to be implemented. You'll have maybe you've got architects in there or functional consultants, all of those sorts of things in there defining all of that work. And then it'll get handed off to the implementation team, the developers, the testers, those sorts of guys who actually go and implement it, write the code, get it all done, get it all tested so that you can actually see it and you can use it. So like I said, period 1 might be at the end of that, they deploy the login screen. So all of a sudden now you've got a new login screen in the market, and it's out there and it's available for customers to interact with. At the end of number 2, maybe it's you tackled the new customer sign-on system. So I'm a new customer and I click there, sign up, and I put in my email and my personal details, and I go and create myself a profile. So maybe that's what you tackle number 2. So by the end of number 2, you've now got a new login for existing customers. So they can put in their username and password on their new screen, and it allows them in through a new method. At the end of number 2, you've got the end of 1 in production, and you've also got your new customer experience in terms of how they're signing on and joining up. At the end of number 3, maybe it's a new bank account creation wizard that gets deployed. So any customer, existing or new, is going to be able to interact with the new wizard around creating a bank account. Maybe 4's create a new credit card and 5's create a new home loan, and so forth and so on. So you can see that you're iteratively dropping these things out to your customers, and you're getting that information to them. They're able to see it, they're able to interact with it. Now, what might happen is at some point throughout this scale, your customer service team start getting inundated with calls saying that the new credit card application system is confusing. They don't like the way that it's laid out, or that it would be really nice if it gave them the options to add bank accounts at the end of it, or transition across onto a personal loan, or maybe it's for new credit cards only, but it's not for balance transfer, so bringing a credit card from another company into yours. So what can happen is as you're delivering the value and as it's all being provided to the customers, those customers can be getting quizzed. Maybe you've got a team calling out to them and doing little surveys or email surveys. How did you find it? And that can all be getting compiled and fed back into the model. So if all of a sudden it's realized, oh, actually, yeah, they're right. We can let our customers create new credit cards, but most of the customers that are going and doing that are actually trying to bring a balance from somewhere else to our bank, and we really want to do that. Now, maybe that was planned for iteration 9. Maybe it wasn't planned at all. Maybe that model wasn't scoped into this piece of work. But what you can do is, let's say you've dropped that at the end of 3. You've collated all this information, and there's been some decisions within the business that actually we want to prioritize this. We want to do this next. We want to add this to this piece of work. It could be brought in, maybe that takes 4 and 5 to be done. So maybe the thing that the team works on in 6 is this balance transfer, or bringing their credit card balances from a competing bank into our bank and being able to do that. So then the work you did in 3, which was delivering that new credit card sign-up thing, all of a sudden gets adjusted and changed and reshaped and redeployed to be brand new credit cards. So I don't have one, I want to create a new one. And also I have a credit card elsewhere and I want to bring that into the bank. So you can see there that we can, by getting drops more regularly out to customers where deployments are smaller, the risk associated is smaller, it's generally faster to get to market, but it's also faster to get that feedback, which means that we can start looking at what's going on and then adjusting our plan and changing our course to transition that forward. So that's effectively how the Agile methodology is supposed to work as a whole. Now, Wagile. So Wagile, the way it basically takes elements from both. So quite often what I see is that a business will want to have a total cost signed off and approved before they commence any project. So where you look at something that's agile, you generally agreeing, or the concept there is that you're generally agreeing to retain a certain number of resources which will be at your disposal to work on whatever you decide is next. So there's this potential for a constantly changing and evolving stream of work that will be going through to that team, and you'll just keep feeding them and feeding them and feeding them. And that will be based on whatever is most valuable at the time to the business and where they think they can derive the most value from. And we'll get into that later on. But often Wagile, I've seen it so a business will want a full cost. So we're going to be upgrading the banking system, and they won't be happy with, well, it costs us, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a fortnight to run this team. And so if you just keep giving us that $20,000 a fortnight, we'll just keep doing work, and at some point we'll get it done. based on the competing priorities and all that sort of stuff. At some point, we'll get it done. And often the finance department of a business will say, no, we're not approving that. We're not happy with that, not at all. So what you'll then have to do is the team will have to sit down and estimate the entire, scope out and estimate the entire project at the start. So you need to understand what every screen looks like, what every button click does, what every process flow looks like, how it all comes together, how it all pieces together, how your customers are going to interact with it, what they're going to do. You potentially have to do user interviews. You have to design this entire piece of work, everything up front to the nth degree. So traditionally, and the way that I like to run my Agile projects is you'll get a good idea of what everything looks like and a bit of a gauge. So you'll have this sort of funnel where at the start of a project, you'll be working on it and you think, oh, it's about this big. And then as you get closer and closer, those estimates get more and more specific and you're able to actually define exactly what it's looking like. Often that's not good enough to get sign off and approval to proceed with a project. So you have to decide, you have to go through that waterfall type planning and designing up front to ensure that everything is estimated. And you can go back and you can say, based on absolutely everything that we know at this point in time, we think it's going to take us 30 weeks, 60 weeks, whatever it is, an X amount of dollars to be able to deliver on this, plus a contingency of this, because there's a bit of risk or a bit of uncertainty around some of these things, and we won't know them until we actually start getting into them. And then at that point, you'll receive your approval and your sign off, hopefully, to be able to proceed. And then you'll start breaking it down into the chunks like that. But all that planning and design has largely already been done. So all you're really doing in your during that project phase is just constantly feeding the implementation team. You need to go and find other things to do with your designers and developers to be able to do that. Equally, and that's not necessarily a bad idea. I've run teams where I've had my analysts and my designers and my owners and everything like that sort of on an iteration cycle on a different project ahead of the deployment team or the execution team, and they've both sort of been working one in front of the other as they've been transitioning through on different pieces of work. And it takes a bit of coordination, but it can be done. But the other big thing with a Wagile project is that the team might be working in they might be an Agile team and they're working in Agile and they're doing all of the ceremonies and they're working in their time box or their sprints or their iterations or they're working off a Kanban board or however they've decided to do their work. But nothing's getting out to the market until a set and certain date. So the business has said, we're not willing to deploy anything. We're not willing for anybody to see anything because this is a new initiative. It's a secret initiative. It's a strategic initiative, and we want it all to go on a certain date. So the team are working and working and working, and they're creating things that are the Agile term, shippable, deployable, done, all that sort of stuff. But no one's going to, it's not going to see the light of day until a set point in time. Just like that Waterfall project, you're doing all of that work, but it's not going to get to the outside world until a set point in time and a decision is made to let it go. Wagile can work really, really well. It can, if executed correctly, as I mentioned before, and you've got your teams aligned correctly and everybody knows what they're doing and they're given the freedom of choice to be able to fail and fail fast, and they're supported with no blame initiatives, and all of those good aspects are dragged out of the Agile methodology. It can be a really great way to deploy work in a really fun and entertaining way, and the team love what they do and are able to deliver greatness. Most of what I've ended up on when we've sat down with customers who either don't know what they're doing or how to implement something, or we've sat down with customers that have had really bad experiences and they've either got projects that are on fire and need to be salvaged, or they've just dragged a dead project across the line and that's over budget, over time, and just underappreciated or hasn't met the goals. Often what we find is by the time we understand what the business actually wants, needs, and can resource, support, and deliver upon, and we look at the technical teams and what they're wanting to do and how they're wanting to do it, Wagile is often where we end up, where we keep those execution teams, the design teams, the planning teams, all of them working in an agile way, so that they're able to change and pivot, and they're able to adjust, and they're able to learn, and they're able to self-organize, and they're protected and all those sorts of things. But we're also able to put this framework around the team to protect them, which means that the business gets exactly what they want, and it's delivered in a way that they can actually keep up with it, they can understand it, and they're comfortable with being able to do it. Because you've got to remember that a lot of businesses these days have technology in their business, but they're not technology companies. So doing things like Atlassian or Google, where you're doing 500 deployments in a week, doesn't make sense for them, because there's certain reasons why they want to do things in certain ways. So Wagile is often where we ended up. I'm not at all saying it is the best. It is just a blending, I suppose, of these two specific methodologies that we've been talking about today, and calling out that most of the time, in my experience, this is where we've ended up, because this is what has suited the organization who is the key stakeholder the best. So how do you pick? Okay, so think about your project specifically. We touched on this before. It is project to project. You need to understand what is important, what's the strategic goals of the business, how are we going to deliver it, all those sorts of things. You need to calculate your risk and your confidence. There is no point in going fully agile or any of these other methodologies that promise rapid prototyping, quick to market, all that sort of stuff, if you don't have the risk, if the business doesn't, or the customer doesn't have a risk appetite for it, or if you don't have confidence that your team can deliver exactly what's been defined within the work scope. I get all too often, I've seen this come crashing down, where everyone's gotten really excited about being DevOps or being Agile or any of these things. They don't really understand what it means. The team aren't working cohesively as yet. They're still in the forming or the storming. They haven't gotten to the sort of the norming and performing aspects of it, and or they're under resourced, or they're stretched beyond capacity, or whatever the case is, and it ends up falling over because you've chosen the wrong methodology to be able to support that team. And then understand your market and your audience. Understand who you're dealing with, how you're dealing with it, and what the impacts to them are actually going to be. If you are dealing in a sector or a segment where users don't like rapid or continuous change, or it's jarring for them, then certain methodologies may be better with others. If you have to support the teams because of the type of project that it is, or the industry that you're working amongst, if you have to support them with a lot of training, with a lot of support materials, with a lot of defined programs, or maybe accreditations based on what it is that you're developing, then that may steer you in another way. Where if you're just working within a business where it's highly transactional, fast moving, and people are in and out of your technologies very quickly, you may base a younger demographic in the city with high-speed internet connections and high social media usage and adoption rates differently to what you might do an older demographic in a rural area with poor connectivity. There's lots of aspects to be able to look at in terms of how do you choose the right methodology for the project that you're undertaking. Equally, can you change? You can, but again, change can be jarring within the team. So how you manage that change will come down to the team, the business, and how everybody's done. I don't recommend it. Generally see the project through, but you can make adjustments to the course. But don't flick from one to the other and back. That's far too jarring, and you end up losing far too much productivity and time. So in my experience, 80% of projects run into serious issues that were completely and totally avoidable if the correct methodology had been understood, used, and implemented in a way that suited the business. Again, I know I keep harping onto this, but all too often people just rush in. They jump in and say, we're Agile because it's exciting and it's cool, and we'll do all of these fun things and everything like that. And then weeks, months in, all of a sudden there are serious issues within the development team or within the business trying to keep up, or amongst the entire project, so all facets of the project, and these all could have been avoidable if some more time had been put in there. In my SDLC video, I talk lightly on planning, and we'll do a whole video on that, but not planning is planning to fail. So you need to do, learn, discuss, and adapt. We're all learning. I still don't get it right all the time, but it's how you react to that, and how you ensure you can recover it, and then equally how willing you are to dedicate yourself to the recovery and what resources you're willing and times you're willing to dedicate to that recovery as well. So in my experience, planning matters. Getting as much information up front, having experience, knowing what you're doing, having been through it time and time again, nothing can be better than that. I have seen businesses with really glossy sales pitches, good brochures, huge promises, constantly come unstuck because they're failing to plan and they don't have enough experience. There was a cartoon picture that I saw quite a while ago of the resource that we required, and it was sharply dressed person standing there with their university degree or their certificate saying that they were a scrum master or whatever the case was, and then the one that we actually needed, and that person was drawn out as being battle scarred, hardened, looked like the caricature of a major who's been to every theater of war on the planet and knows exactly how to interact and how to win. Nothing beats experience and nothing beats solid planning, and unfortunately you can't get solid planning without the experience. You need to have at least an openness and willingness to learn, and you've got to have someone experienced in there guiding you on that journey, unless you're willing to quickly learn and take the pain as it goes, and it will be painful. I've been there, I understand it. But experience and solid planning really comes down to being able to pick the right teams, being able to pick the right partners to engage with, being able to pick the right methodologies, being able to pick the right way to win. So that's it, guys. Agile, Waterfall, and Wagile, just a couple of methodologies there. I'd love to get your feedback. So if you've got any ideas on additional content, if you've got anything that you want to discuss, please drop a comment below. And don't forget, like the video, subscribe, and hopefully I'll keep creating more of these. All right, thanks everybody, and until next time, keep innovating.